I'm Yukio Futatsugi, and I was a game director and a game designer of the Panzer Dragoon series. And
I'm Kentaro Yoshida. I'm a Panzer Dragoon Zwei art director. And now is so Grandic Kyoto studio director.
and now I'm working in the Granding, my own company now.
A little promo.
じゃあ、
はい。
じゃあ、あとは日本語でやりつつ、通訳で進めたいと思います。
Okay, we'll begin. I'll be speaking in Japanese while you will hear the translation right afterwards.
ちょっとまずパンツァードラグーンってなんだったっけっていう話から始めたいと思います。
So first of all, I'd like to start off with the simplest question. Not that you don't know, but what is Panzer Dragoon?
まあ、それ話す必要のある人ここにいるとも思えないような気もするんですけど。
I'm sure you all know, but...
セガサターン用ソフトとして、1995年の、日本は3月10日に発売されました。アメリカではローンチタイトルでした。来年で、ちょうど25年になります。
So Panzer Dragoon is a Sega Saturn game that was released in Japan first on March 10th, 1995, and then in the US 2 months later on May 11th, which was part of a surprise launch of the system. And next year, it will be celebrating its 25th anniversary.
僕がセガに入社して、1年経った頃に、セガサターン用の企画書を書けっていう話が、会社であって、その時に、残ってたジャンルがちょうどドライブとシューティングだったんですね。で、最初は実は、ドライブを選んで、企画書を書いたんですけども、しばらくしたらゲイルレーサーが決まったんで、最後に残ってるジャンルが 3D シューティングだけだったので、じゃあ 3D シューティングの企画書を書きますって言って、作ったのがパンツァードラグーンです。
So only 1 year after joining Sega, the company, I was asked to come up with a design document for a brand new Saturn game. And at that time, I was given a choice, but the choice was down to only 2 different genres. One was racing and the other one was shooting. And I actually chose racing and even drafted a document based on that. But Gale Racer was then greenlit right after that. And so I had no choice but to really come up with an idea for a shooting game. And so this was the beginning of what turned into the 3D shooting game, Panzer Dragoon.
で、なぜドラゴンのシューティングゲームにしたかなんですけれども、サターンの企画を作る仕事を始めたときに、3D のゲームを作るんだったら見ておけって言われて、当時 AM2 件で開発中だったバーチャファイターを見せてもらいました。
So at the time, Virtua Fighter, I'm sure you all know, was being developed at a different team, at the AM2 team. And I was told it was something I had to see if I was going to make a 3D game.
で、その時に人型のモデルが柔らかい動きをしているのを見て、同じようなことをやりたいなと思いました。
And when I saw the character models and their realistic movements, I knew that that was exactly what I needed to aim for.
ご存知の通り、当時 3D シューティングといえば戦闘機などの動きがない硬いモデルのものばっかりだったんですけど、その中に柔らかいキャラクターを出せば、相当インパクトがあるだろうというふうに考えました。
And most 3D shooting games back then featured models of very hard and sharp-looking objects like fighter planes. So in contrast to that, I thought a character that moved like a living creature would stand out.
で、あと、もう一つ乗ってみたいものっていうのは何だろうっていうのを、チームみんなで話をして、アイデアを出していって、誰もが乗ってみたいと思ったのはやっぱドラゴンだったので、最終的にドラゴンに乗るシューティングゲームを作ろうという、基本方針が決まりました。
And then I thought on ideas of what kinds of things I want to try riding. A dragon seemed like something that anyone would want to ride, and that's how I arrived at the decision to make a shooting game where you ride a dragon.
これはですね、当時作成した企画書です。
These are some sample design documents from those days.
このページがちょうどプレイアクションに関する部分なんですけども、よく見るとお分かりになると思うんですが、実は最初はホーミングレーザーじゃなかったんですね。
So they're centered around the action, the types of action that would be available to the player. And if you look very carefully, you'll notice that we didn't have the homing laser at first.
で、また世界観も、基本的なファンタジーもので考えていて、今とは違うものでした。
And we were also thinking that the game's world would fit more into the fantasy genre.
で、ホーミングレーザーは実は 3D シューティング自体、その仕組み自体、敵を狙うっていうのが非常に難しいので、それを解決するために後から実装しました。
And the homing laser was implemented later after we determined that the 3D shooting mechanics made aiming difficult.
また世界観は、企画が通った後で、時間があったので、作り込んでいくっていうことになりまし
And
た。
then the world and the setting of Panzer Dragoon was fleshed out only after the game was officially greenlit.
当時、いろんな 3D シューティングがあったんですけども、自分が特に好きだったのが、ナムコのスターブレードです。
So among all the shooting games that were available at that time, I was particularly interested and really liked Starblade from Namco.
で、スター・ウォーズ的なストーリーを体感できる点とか、あと特にですね、BGM が最後までずっとなくて、最後のライバル機との戦闘、途中でライバルが出てきて、最後の戦闘で初めて BGM が再生されるとか、そういった演出っていうのがすごい好きで、自分でシューティングゲームを作るんだったら、やっぱ同じようなその物語を体感できるようなものにしたいというふうに思いました。
I was really moved and really impressed by the game's cinematic presentation and how it offered the experience of a very grand Star Wars-like story. And another thing that took me by surprise, but thought it worked really well, was the lack of background music until the very, very end, where you first hear it as you engage in a showdown with the rival ship. So playing that game, I thought that if I were to ever make a shooting game, that I'd want to make it like Starblade.
そのために、最初から最後まで、一つの物語のように、面構成を作っていくっていうことと、ゲームに関係ない画面情報もできるだけ増やして、プレイヤーにいろんなことを想像させる。
So to that point, we landed on these objectives that you see here. The first one being to show the game as a continuous story that flows seamlessly from the very beginning to the end. Secondly, maximize the use of on-screen information to work the player's imagination.
あとは、幕間にゲーム中のオブジェクトを使ったポリゴン劇を入れるっていうのと、あとレールシューティングっていうのは時間が決まってるんで、ボスに至るまでは、映画のようにゲーム展開に合わせて、画面に合わせて、音楽を作ってもらって、曲で盛り上げようっていうような方針を決めました。
Thirdly, inserting polygonal cutscenes during interludes that use objects from the game proper. And then the last one was we knew that creating a rail shooter game, the time frame of how long that lasted was pretty much a fixed time lane. So creating music that matched the fixed pace of the game's progression all the way up until the last boss encounter, much like you would see sort of directed or planned out in a movie. That was one of our objectives as well.
で、ここからはパンツァードラグーンについてのビジュアルコンセプトについて語ります。
So for the next couple of slides, I will talk about the visual concepts of Panzer Dragoon.
で、パンツァードラグーンのビジュアルコンセプトというのはデザイナー、そうですね、アートディレクターの楠木さんが作り上げました。
The visual concepts were created by designer and art director Manabu Kusunoki.
で、スター・ウォーズであったりで、デューンであったり、オネアミスの翼であったり、それらと同じように、その世界観が、ちゃんと、その作品の中の世界観を表現できるような架空のパンツァー世界の文化や、風景のコンセプト資料っていうのを楠木さんが作成して、それを、ゲームの実際のデザインに落としていきました。
Very much like how things were done, we assume, for Star Wars, Dune, Royal Space Force, The Wings of Onemis, and so on. We created lots of concept materials related to the cultures and the landscapes of this fictional world that we were creating, and then applied that to the game design.
で、当時のデザイン資料を持ってきたので、いくつか説明いたします。
So I brought some of the actual concept assets from back then, so I'd like to go through some of these.
で、最初が9世紀ですね。で、まず、二次が9世紀というパワードを決めました。
So the first one is the ancient age. This term or phrase from Futatsuki-san was our key word. It carried tremendous weight throughout the entire course of developing and working on this project.
でゲーム中で起こる不条理なことというのは、その急世紀だからというワードで納得をさせる。で、ゲームの面白さを作るために設定的におかしいものが出てきても、それを急世紀だから、そうかもなと思わせるようにしました。
So basically, everything was centered around ancient age. So anything that didn't fit into the ideas or concepts that initially felt like they didn't fit into the ancient age became nothing less than natural once we applied that term, saying that this is what it is. This is when it happened. In order to build up the interesting elements of this game, we went about making it such that even if it was truly bizarre, out of this world idea, we would say, oh no, the player would think, well, if we're talking about the ancient age here, then I suppose it makes sense. And that's how we made sense of it all.
で実際のゲーム中のビジュアルの中でキーとなる、白い素材と特徴的なラインで構成された構造物というのがまず9世紀の、コンセプトデザインになっています。
A highly advanced civilization that flourished in an age-long past with systematic designs that use ceramic tone materials and metallic parts, very similar to mechanical timepieces and so on. They became what we would call the motif of the overall design direction.
でこの世界の過去に反映した高度な文明の名残でセラミック調の素材であったり、機械式の時計調の金属パーツというのをデザインに含めています。
すいません、先に訳しちゃいました。
そうですね。じゃあ次行きますね。まだ残ってる。で、そのモチーフとなってますけれども、そうですね。あとは、そうですね。大友克洋さんの画集で見たベガのイラスト、そういうのもすごい参考にした思い出があります。
The motif and the overall design direction that I just mentioned, these designs were actually largely influenced by a character that was created by Otomo-san, Katsuhiro Otomo, the character Vega.
で次に出てくるのが帝国になります。
And next we have the Empire.
こちらは一度滅んだ世界から復興を遂げた文明国。帝国のデザインは現代の一次大戦の時の戦車や戦艦といった武骨な兵器のデザインと先ほどの長い年月を経て発掘された9世紀の兵器であったりエンジンを組み合わせるというコンセプトで作っています。
So with the Empire, the setting is that this is a civilized country that recovered from the world once it was destroyed. So we combined weaponry like the tanks and battleships of World War I, and then the excavated weaponry and engine from the ancient age. So it was a combination that sort of created the foundation of the design.
はい、でゲーム中でシルエットを目立たせたり、巨大感を出すということを意識して、ゲーム中では作ってます。
And one sort of key area that I really focused on or wanted to highlight was making these silhouettes really stand out. And by doing so, it gave it a sense of massive scale.
で次に主役のドラゴンとあと敵の構成生物になります。
And next we have the dragons and the attack organisms.
でドラゴンは9世紀の生物兵器ということで先ほどの9世紀のものと同じく白い装甲をつけています。
So for the dragons, they were organic weapons of the ancient age. So we gave them the same white armor that those of the ancient age would wear.
で構成生物については、9世紀に作られたそのままのものっていうのは、装甲がついている。でそうでないものは外しています。
And for the attack organisms, those were created during the ones that were created during the ancient age were given armor, while the armor was removed for those that were not.
なので、ゲームの中でも装甲がついているものは強く、でついてないものは弱いと、そういうような設定、位置づけを行いました。
And then in the game, they were ranked accordingly. So the former were stronger, and the latter, with the armor removed, were weaker.
で、こちら今度この世界の設定になります。
And then next we have the world.
で、パンツァードラグーンの舞台となるのは、星の自浄能力が消えかかって滅びゆく世界になっています。
So the planet is losing the ability to purify itself and steadily edges towards oblivion.
で、それは過去に高度な技術の戦争によって破壊された星が長い年月をかけて自然に帰っていくというようなイメージになっています。
and the planet ravaged by war is reclaimed by nature as the ages drag on.
で、これまで説明したこれらの設定を大切に、開発者が大切にすることで、その後のツバイであったり、アゼルであったり、それらもパンツァー世界と呼ばれるビジュアルを、きちっと守って実現しています。
The visuals that make up the world of Panzer Dragoon are realized in both Zwei and Saga by cherishing these elements of the world's lore.
で、このように世界観にこだわる時間ができたっていうのは、実はサターンの開発機の制作っていうのが結構遅れてまして、実際の開発が進められない時間が2、3ヶ月ぐらいありました。
And so there's actually a little episode here. The reason that we were able to dedicate so much time to the particulars and the specifics of the world and the creation here was because the Sega Saturn's development kits, they were behind schedule. And we had an extra 2 or 3 months where we were unable to proceed with development.
その間にいろいろとこの世界について詰めていくことができて、結果的によく、パンツァー語っていうのもありますけど、それもその時に考えられたものです。
Which was ultimately a good thing, and it worked towards our favor, as during that time we were able to really flesh out the world in a lot of different ways. It was also this time that we came up with Panzerese, the fictional language of the world.
Take down the PlayStation.
Yes.
ですね、プレイステーションっていうライバルハードとセガサターンはほぼ同時に発売されることになりました。
So, as we all know, PlayStation, our rival hardware, was set to launch around the same time as the Sega Saturn.
で、3D 性能はプレイステーションの方が高いという評判だけは、セガの内部でも聞こえてました。
And it had a reputation for having superior 3D capabilities. That was no secret. Even within Sega, it was a hot topic.
セガサターンっていうのはある意味ですね、実は究極の 2D ハードです。で、なので、非常に優れたスクロール表示能力を持ってました。
And in a way, the Sega Saturn was the ultimate 2D hardware system, but it possessed the best scrolling display capabilities.
で、プレイステーションに勝つ表現をするためには、そのスクロールをうまく使って、画面の広がり、空間の広がりを表現する必要があるっていう方針で、進めてきました。
And in order to win over and sort of beat PlayStation's visual presentation, we needed to showcase the expanse of space on screen.
で、空の雲を書き込んだりとか、円形とか水面、砂漠とかの、スクロールを使って、見せられるようなものを、主体にしたレベルデザインにするというようなことで、を行ってきました。
So with that in mind, we designed levels, taking scrolling to the max through vast landscapes with clouds and water surfaces and deserts.
ここに来られているのは、このセガファン、サターンファンの方ならご存知だと思いますが、サターンの3D 表現能力っていうのは変形スプライトで構成されています。
So Saturn fans here and everywhere else, you may be aware of this, but on the Saturn, 3D visuals are constructed using transformed sprites.
で、今のゲーム開発者の方には信じられないと思うんですけども、1ポリゴンイコール1スプライトで、ポリゴンの数だけテクスチャーを用意する必要がある上に、テクスチャーも歪みます。
So modern game developers may find this very, very tough to believe, but each and every polygon is a sprite. So not only did we need to prepare individual textures for each polygon, but the textures also warped.
で、パンツァーの開発の時には、オリジナルのテクスチャー切り出しツールを、プログラマーが用意してくれたので、それでテクスチャーマッピングを行いました。
So for the development of Panzer Dragoon, our programmer put together an original texture splitting tool that we could use for texture mapping.
あと、プレイステーションに比べると、半透明の機能とか、ポリゴン同士の、描画演算もかなり貧弱なものでした。
And in addition to that, the Saturn, when compared to the PlayStation, didn't pack much of a punch in terms of translucency, functionality, or polygon interaction.
ただ、結果的にそれが、キラキラしたメタリックな世界じゃなくて、パンツァードラグーンの乾いた世界観にうまくマッチして、独特のビジュアルが表現できたと 今振り返れば思います。
But looking back at it now, I believe we were able to create these unique visuals that mesh very well with the sort of dry world of Panzer Dragoon, not something that's shiny and sort of glamorous. And not that I would ever want to go back to that era of game development, but I think it really worked out for the game.
まあ、もっとも、じゃああの頃のようにゲーム作ってって言われたら、もう、いや、結構ですって言いますけども。
Yeah, so if you ask me now to go through that again and make something similar, I would kindly refuse.
まあ、結果的に、まあ、プレイステーションにはできない映像が作れたとは思っています。
But as a result, we created visuals that were impossible on the PlayStation.
まあ、それでもですね、当時、メインプログラマー、ゲームを作ってたプログラマーのストーさんと、まあ、プレイステーションのお披露目イベントに行ったんですけども、まあ、その時にリッジレーサーを見て、衝撃を受けてですね、帰りに二人でこう、駅で、どうするあれどうしようみたいな話をこう、すごいしたのを覚えてます。
But I have, I'll tell you a quick story. I do remember going to a PlayStation sort of presentation of their debut of the hardware with all these titles. I was there with our programmer, Sudo-san, and he was working obviously on Panzer Dragoon. While we were there, we saw Ridge Racer, and we were so blown away. The level of shock was so big that on the way back, we were riding home, taking the train back, and we're like, what the hell are we going to do about this?
まあ、それぐらい、プレイステーションをセガでは、まあ、僕らは意識してました。
And that's how much we were thinking about and how conscious we were at Sega about PlayStation.
まあ、そのおかげでですね、未だにその後遺症でプレイステーション1のことを考えると、こう、イラッとします。
So even to this day, I have this lingering sort of trauma from those days, from that era, that causes me to be very, very irritated anytime I think about it or someone mentions the original PlayStation.
なので、まあなんでこの間もプレイステーションクラシックの CM がテレビで流れてるのをこう見るたびにすごいこう辛かったです。
And so seeing, I don't know if you guys had commercials out here, but there are some PlayStation Classic commercials airing on TV. And it's not pleasant to me. It's very, very painful to watch.
はい。じゃあ、ですね。まあそういうわけで、パンツァーが発売されて、まあ、それなりにセールスを作ったので、まあシューティングとしての面白さと、まあ世界観のユニークさ両方が受け入れられたので、まあその双方に特化した続編を、まあ作れっていうことになりました。
So even after all that pain that we went through, the first Panzer Dragoon was very well received, both in terms of how much fun it is as a game, as a shooting game, and the uniqueness of the world that we built. And so we were told to make separate sequels that specialized in each of those areas.
で、実はですね、その物語とか基本方針の決定を行った後は、まあ、ツバイの準備を終えた後は、チームは実は2つに分かれて、ツバイと、サーガっていうのは同時進行で開発が行われてました。
So what we did was we decided on the story and the general direction that things would go in. And after some of the groundwork was laid for Zwei, we actually split the teams into two, and they were developed side by side or simultaneously at the same time.
で、僕はサーガを中心にやっていて、吉田健太郎はまあツバイを中心にやってたんで、次ツバイの話は彼からしてもらおうと思います。
So I basically led the Saga team, whereas Yoshida here led the Zwei team. So I'm going to hand it back to him, and let's talk a little bit about that.
で、パンツァードラグーンのゲームシステムっていうのは、まあ、時期を移動させるタイプの 3D シューティングと、まあ、時期が移動しないガンシューティングの2つのゲーム性が混在しています。
So the game systems of Panzer Dragoon are primarily a mix of two concepts. The first being a 3D type shooter where you're able to move your character, and then a light gun type shooter where you don't move.
で、これを一つのゲームにまとめることの難しさは、開発中からまあ諸先輩方に指摘されてました。
And during development, the difficulty of combining these two into a single game is something that I was told, it was called out to me by the more higher sort of experienced colleagues and development staff at the company.
で、パンツァードラグーン1ではまあ半ば力技を使ってまあ一つのゲームにまとめたんですけれども、まあシューティングの次の続編っていうのはまあこれらをなんとかしたかったです。
But even so, we were able to somehow combine these two together for Panzer Dragoon 1. But we knew that if we were going to make a sequel focused primarily on the shooting elements, I wanted to make sure that we aimed higher.
で、また、物語を表現するがゆえに、一回クリアしたら終わりという問題点もありました。
And also, seeing how we were also telling a story, we had this problem where someone might think that, well, if I finish once, I'm done with the game.
で、最初のパンツァードラグーンでは、その時間を引き延ばすために難易度を上げるというような手段で長く遊べるようにしていました。
For Panzer Dragoon 1, what we did in order to not let that sort of feeling linger on to the users, what we did was we stretched out the game's length purely by raising its difficulty, resulting in a game that you could play for much longer.
なので当然のようにゲームが難しすぎるという声が大きかったです。
Obviously, as a result, we did hear a lot of users, players, and fans talking about how the game was too hard.
で、その続編のツバイでは、ストーリー性はあるけれども何度も遊びたくなって、かつ難しさを感じないシューティングとしての、感じないけれどもシューティングとしての面白さは感じるという矛盾した問題を解決する必要がありました。
So with Zwei, having narrative elements to it, but we needed a solution to this very big problem of how do you make a game that you want to play over and over repeatedly and is fun to play purely for its shooting elements without it ever being difficult.
なので、結果としてここに書いてあるようなことを実装していくことになりました。
So some of the things listed on this slide on the bullet points, these are the things that help us sort of resolve that problem that we had.
で、ツバイ遊んだ人は記憶に残ってると思いますけど、飛翔感を出すための地上ステージの映像になります。
So those who have played, I'm sure this is very familiar to you, but we wanted to figure out a way to really accentuate the sensation of flight.
で、このゲームの地面っていうのが先ほどあったように、サターンの回転スクロール面を使って表現しているんですけれども、今ちょうどここですね。山からの飛翔を再現するためには、高いところと低いところ両方に地面が必要でした。
So the ground is made using Sega Saturn's scrolling layer. In order to represent flying from the mountains, we needed to show the ground in locations both high and low. But the thing is, we only had one scrolling layer to use.
ただ回転スクロール面っていうのは1枚しか使えません。で、ですね。で、そこでドラゴンが地上を疾走している先ほどあった高所エリアのところに急な曲がり角を作って、その部分の地面だけは地面を 3D モデルで表現しています。
So what we had to do is make smart use of these corners and turns, like you see right now, going from higher to lower and vice versa, sort of quickly switching the scrolling layer in between.
で、地面の切り替えが見えないタイミングでスクロール面を低いところ用に切り替えて、今回の問題を解決しています。
So by doing so, we were sort of tricking the players into thinking that you would see the high and low while you're making these turns and making these corners.
プログラマーが苦労した部分なんですけれども、そのおかげでユーザーに飛翔感であったり、ドラゴンの成長を味わわせることができたと思います。
So while this wasn't an easy task, I think this was a good resolution that our team, our programmers came up with. We struggled with it, but we're ultimately very happy. And we think that it provided the player with both a very high sort of quality experience in terms of the sensation that you get of flying, and also at the same time seeing the dragon's growth.
で、またプレイヤーのスキルに合わせて自動的に難易度を変える仕組みも実装しています。
And we also implemented a mechanic that automatically adjusts the difficulty based on the player's skill.
これは3D シューティングっていうコアなゲームをもっといろんな人が楽しめるように、ツバイのディレクターである近藤さんが難易度調整システム ADEC をゲームに取り入れました。
Why we did this is because our director, Kondo-san, 3D shooting game could be categorized as more of a core game that is not open to or as easy to get into for someone that is not a shooting game sort of pro player. So he incorporated this difficulty adjustment system, ADIC, into the game. By the way, it says automatic difficulty adjustment, but ADIC does stand for automatic difficulty enemy control system.
で、ユーザーのプレイ結果を判定して、敵の硬さや強さで、弾の数などをプレイ中にリアルタイムに調整するシステムです。これは結構時代を先取りしたシステムでした。
And what this system did was it was looking at the player's results and it would dynamically adjust the number of enemies, the number of remaining bullets, and so on, all the while you played. So the system itself was very much ahead of its time.
はい。ツバイの開発と並行して、パンツァーサーガ、3作目のサーガの開発も行ってました。
So as I said earlier, on one hand, we had Team Zwei working on that, and then I was leading Team Saga.
自分今25年以上、ゲームの仕事をしてるんですけど、今までで一番しんどかったプロジェクトは何って聞かれたら、もう間違いなく、サーガだって即答できます。
So let me start off by saying that if you were to ask me which game in my 25-year career in game development gave me the most grief,
それはなぜ
you might probably know the answer already, but let me tell you, without even a shred of doubt, this is it.
で、それはなぜかって聞かれると、とにかく、新しいことにいろいろ挑戦しすぎたんですね。
And the why, then why is it Saga? Why is it this game? Well, we simply try to do way too much.
ここに今出してるのは企画書で、開発始めた時ではなくて、半年から1年の間ぐらいで途中経過みたいなのを報告するために作った時の企画書です。
So what you see on the slide here right now, I know it's very hard to see. This is not the initial concept or design document. This is a design document maybe 6 months to a year into production, trying to explain to the larger group what we were trying to do.
で、まずフル 3D の RPG を作ろうとしました。パンツァー1作目でやったことを広げて、RPG に単純にしようとしたんですね。で、3D モデルで映画を体験できるゲームっていうのをじゃあシューティングじゃなくて今度は RPG で作ろうとしました。
So what we were trying to do is to make a full 3D RPG. And not just that, we tried to take the original Panzer Dragoon and flesh it out in a way that would make it into an RPG. We basically took a game that allowed you to experience a movie that plays out with 3D models and try to make an RPG out of it.
で当時はバイオハザードなどもそうなんですけども、背景を連題にしてキャラのみをモデルっていう形で効果的に効率よく見せるっていうような形でやってました。
And at that time, you had games that would render images for the backgrounds and then use model for the characters alone as a means for presenting them more effectively. A good example that comes to mind is Resident Evil.
それに対して、世界そのものを 3D で全部作っちゃって、そこで映画をやればいいんじゃないかっていうふうな、当時で、今考えると、当時無茶苦茶なことを挑戦しようとしてました。
So with that as our starting point, we decided to jump on this crazy challenge for ourselves of creating the entire world in 3D and then making movies in it.
今では当たり前の考えなんですけど、当時自分が知る限りでは、それに挑んだタイトルっていうのはまだ PC の一部を除いたらほとんどなかったと思います。
So this is obviously, we're talking about today, is a very natural thing to do. But as far as I know, aside from maybe a few PC titles, I don't believe there were many games that had yet attempted to do what we were trying to do.
で、あとシューティングを RPG のバトルに置き換えるっていうのはすごい大変でした。
Also, to where the title says, to new RPG battles that played like 3D shooters. This was a massive challenge.
普通考えないですよね。シューティングを RPG にしようとか。
You don't even probably think about doing this.
で、普通の RPG とあまりにも違いすぎるんで、いろいろと議論やテストのビルドを作ったんですけども、結局1年経ってもまともなものができてないという状態でした。
It was so different from your typical RPG that even after a lot of discussions, a lot of trying, a lot of testing out these test builds, a whole year went by and we had really nothing good to show for it.
なんで戦闘システムを作る、責任者を入れ替えて、別の人が作ることになりました。
So at that point, we swapped out the person in charge of creating the battle system and gave it to someone else.
余談ですけど、その人は向山という人なんですけども、後のオルタのディレクターを務めています。向山。
Mukayama. And that person is Mukayama-san. He would actually later on go to direct Panzer Dragoon Orta.
で、シューティングらしさっていうのは結構位置取りバトルでやって、位置取りバトルで実現しようとしました。
So where you once had what looks like a shooting game, you're now constantly trying to position yourself advantageously.
で、RPG 的な要素も、プレイヤーがソロなのでパーティーが存在しないっていうのは、ドラゴンのリアルタイム変形によるタイプチェンジ。で、物理と魔法っていう存在は、ドラゴンによる攻撃とプレイヤーの攻撃、あと多彩な、ボム系の攻撃というふうな、新しい仕組みに全部従来の仕組みを置き換えていきました。
And where you once had a game with a single character and no party, you now have a dragon that can change types and does so in real time. Not only that, it was no longer just a physical and magical. The dragon can attack, the player can attack, and you also have a variety of explosives at your disposal. These are some of the examples of how we swapped out the mechanics.
最初はですね、実はどこまでも自由に進めるゲームを作ろうという話もあったんですけども、それをやると、どうしてもやっぱ当時の技術だとマップの見た目のクオリティが落ちてしまって、パンツァードラグーンらしいゲームにならないので、なので、フィールドは全体マップから任意の場所に移動して、その場所の中は自由に移動できるという箱庭にするというような仕組みで、ゲームを構築することにしました。
So then we wanted to make a game where you could go wherever you wanted, but doing so really harmed the visual quality of the map. And it also wouldn't end up being very Panzer-esque anyway. So instead, we made a system where you could choose which field to go from an entire map. And then once you were inside, you would have a miniature garden that you could move about freely.
で、街は一定の広さを自由に移動できて、時間の概念も入れて昼と夜があるようにしました。そのためにライティングを実装しています。
And you could freely move about towns to a certain degree. And we also introduced the concept of time, so you had day and night, and see the differences between the two. And to that end, we also implemented, we had to use lighting, making so that you would see the change from dusk to night in real time.
で、また街を広くするために、途中でユーザーにわからないようにメモリを書き換える必要があったんで、実はだからそれで街を2つのエリアに分けて、長いトンネルでその双方がつながるような構成にしています。
And if we were going to make big towns, we needed a way to rewrite things in the memory partway through without making it obvious to the player. And what we did there was we created them so that they would be divided into two separate areas that would be connected by a long tunnel.
街の移動に伴うカメラの制御をどうするかっていうのも苦労した部分です。当時こういった 3D ゲームはまだなかったので、いろいろ全部手探りで作っていきました。今では当たり前のことばかりなんですけども、当時これだけのことをよくやろうとしたなと、今、書類を書いてて思いました。
So while you may have the freedom to move around some large areas, it would be annoying if you had to walk all the way over somewhere just to examine something really small. So we decided to use this lock-on system. One thing we struggled with quite a bit was how to control the camera while moving around the towns. There weren't any 3D games like this at the time, so we had to feel our way through everything we did. These are all things that we take for granted today, but when I think about it, I am really taken aback by just how much we were trying to do back then.
イベントもフル 3D で作ることにしました。で、大量のイベントがあるんで、すべて作り切るのはモーションキャプチャーで撮る必要があるということになりましたが、まだ当時は光学式があまりなくて、 磁気式のモーションキャプチャーを使いました。
We decided to create the game's cutscenes in full 3D as well. Well, after all, we were trying to make a movie here. And because we had such a huge number of events, we concluded that we would need to use motion capture if we were going to make them all. But back then, optical motion capture was still quite rare, so we were using magnetic motion capture.
で、これがその当時のモーションキャプチャーの、ビデオです。
So I brought something. This is actually a video. Well, we were filming the motion capture session for Saga.
ちょっと違うこと喋って。
いいですよ。
磁気式なので結構ノイズが多くて、後でこういろいろ補正して作り直すために、こうグリッドを置いて、作り直しやすいように動画を並行して撮ってます。
So, I mentioned earlier that the optical motion capture was rare, so we had to use magnetic motion capture. But when we do that, then anything in the area emitting magnetism gets picked up as noise. So later on, when we had to sort of clean up the data, in order for us to know kind of the positioning, we had a grid that you see in the left top, I think, corner. We had to place a grid so we had sort of a good sense of where things were placed.
で、これオープニングのシーンです。で、今ちょうどドラゴンに乗るところをやってますけど、実はこれ箱になって、下に人がいるのは、人が、普通に乗ると箱がこけちゃうんで、人が押さえてるとか、結構なんかよくわからないゲーム制作にと関係ないような苦労をいっぱいしました。
So obviously this is the opening scene, and you could see that the person is riding the dragon, which is made up of beer cases. The red and yellow beer cases. And you see another person holding the stack of beer cases, because if that person wasn't there, it would just fall over. So yeah, we had to use some very creative and sort of smart tricks in order to make that happen.
で、ちょっとまとめていきたいと思いますが、とにかくですね、サガはいろんなことに挑戦しすぎたので、今となって当たり前のことばかりですが、当時としては誰もやってなかったことに挑戦いっぱいしました。
So these are only a few examples that I'm sharing today, but we simply charged headlong into too many difficult challenges.
で、それでですね、各所で仕様の決定が遅れて、開発スケジュールが実は結構1年ぐらい大幅に伸びてます。
So as a result, we were unable to nail down the specifics about the various parts of the game, and the development schedule was delayed, maybe by a year.
で、それに伴ってスタッフも疲れてくんで、あちこちで圧力が起きました。
Not only that, our staff were so exhausted, and that led to a lot of conflicts here and there.
フル 3D にしたことでボリュームも大きくなったので、また50人近いチームのマネジメント経験もなくて、当時、大人数を効率よく開発するためのチケットシステムもなくて、管理コストがすごい膨大になりました。
And then management cost spiraled out of control. The game packed a tremendous amount of volume due to it being in fully 3D. I had no experience managing a team of close to 50 people. And we had no ticketing system that we could use to sort of effectively push the development along with this large number of people on staff.
セガのスタッフの質も非常に高いっていうこともあって、なんとか完成はしたんですけど、コストも結構かかったので、結果的にチーム&ルメナが解散することになったっていういきさつはあります。
So the staff at Sega are absolutely top-notch. Everyone is very talented, and it's only probably because of that we were somehow able to finish the game. But the team was disbanded because of how much it cost.
僕はもう今だいぶ、もう50もそろそろ見えてきて大人になったので、今だったらいやこんな挑戦できないでしょって多分言うと思います。
Now that I'm nearing age 50, I would not put this challenge onto myself. I would definitely not do it today.
それでも実現できたのは、やっぱりその当時ゲーム新ハードに変わって、ゲームを新しいものに変えようという空気が業界全体にあったっていうのがあると思います。
But I think we were able to overcome this challenge back then because of the new hardware and all the energy and sort of the spirit just across the industry, not just at Sega, but there was this energy and sort of challenging spirit that was very much alive back then.
まあいろいろ足りないし足りないんですけど、まあとにかく思いついたことをみんなでやってみるっていう風なまあ空気があったのと、まあそういった自分の担当分野以外も何でもやるっていう文化が、まあ、セガにあって、まあ、セガスタッフがすごい優秀だったっていうのはあると思います。
Yeah, so, いいですか少し混ざっても。
はい。
Okay. And so we were able to create games like Panzer Dragoon partly because we were young, and then the culture that we had at Sega was that we just wanted to create something. That was the kind of energy and spirit that was flowing, and that's what made it possible for us to create some really good video games.
ここにいる人は知ってるかどうかわかんないですが、セガの社歌っていう会社の歌がですね、若い力っていうんですね。
So some of you may have heard or have read about this, but Sega has what we call a company song, and this is very common for Japanese companies. The English translation of the title, the Japanese song name is Wakai Chikara. We've translated here into youthful energy.
まさにですね、セガはこう若い力で満ち溢れて、まあ、いたからこそ、まあ、パンツァーのようなタイトルを作れたと思います。
So Sega was truly sort of overflowing with this kind of youthful energy, and that's really probably one of the main reasons why we were able to create a game like Panzer Dragoon.
まあ若いとですね、あんま経験がないんで、その先の苦労が想像できずに、まあ無謀な挑戦をしてしまいます。
When you're young, you naturally have no experience, but you can take on these chances and just really throw yourself at it.
まあだけどそういった、まあ、無謀な挑戦がゲームっていう文化を、まあ、成長させてきたんだというふうに思ってます。
And without the slightest idea of how much hardship you're in for, but that's exactly the kind of recklessness that really pushed our culture, the video game culture.
まあ自分たちも年齢は重ねたんですけど、まあ気持ちはまだ若いんで、若い力を発揮して今後もいろんなことに挑戦していきたいと思ってます。
And moving forward, I want to believe in the promise of this youthful energy. And that goes for me as well, even though I said I'm nearing 50. I may have aged a little bit, but I'm still young on the inside. And so I hope to have many challenges ahead of me.
3つのタイトルの、まあまとめて話すとなかなか時間がないんですが、まあちょっと駆け足でしたが以上でいいから終わりたいと思います。
So to cover all three games in the Panzer Dragoon series, an hour is definitely not enough, but I hope you enjoyed our talk today. And we do have a little bit of time for Q&A, so if it's okay, we'd like to move on to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so there are 3 mics. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to come up.
Hi.
Hi.
Firstly, thank you so much for the game. It means a very lot. It means a lot to me. Is it true that the source code and assets for Saga have been lost?
Very good first question. Probably the top FAQ.
ですね、サガを作ってマスターアップしてリリースするまでの間に実は僕とよしてやめてるんですね。だから本当はどこに行ったのか僕らも知らないんですよ。
So the true story is, so we mastered up Saga, and then between our master date and our release date, I left the company. So the real truth, the true story is that I don't know what happened to the source code.
だけど、
However,
なんか、見つかったんじゃないっていう噂をどこかから聞いたような気がするので、見つかったのかもしれないです。
However, I have heard rumors, and maybe everyone here has heard rumors, that it may have been discovered somewhere at some point.
この部屋を出たら忘れてください。
But forget that I even said that once you leave this room.
Thank you.
I thank you for making this awesome game. Like it's one of the reasons I became game developer. I'd like to ask how hard it was to make the Dragoon movement. Even today, it still looks very smooth and really nice. The tail and the body and swings and the wings. So could you talk a little about that?
このゲームを作ってくださってありがとうございます。このゲームのおかげで僕は今ゲーム開発をしています。で、一番難しいと思われる点なんですけど、今でもドラゴンの動きを見ると本当に素晴らしい敵。今日でもああいう動きを作るの、それのやっぱり苦労した点とか、こういうところが
はい、わかります。
っていう。
で、最初のパンツァードラグのドラゴンのアニメーションはほとんどデザイナーが手でつけたものです。
So for the first Panzer Dragoon, the animation was all done by hand by our animators.
で、ファーストのパンツァードラグンとツバイを比べると、カメラであったり、ドラゴンであったり、全然柔らかさが違うと思います。
And I think you will agree with me that between the first and the second, including the camera movement, it's quite, there's a leap in the progression or the advancement that we made.
で、これらはツバイの、プログラマーである須藤さんであったり、中西が、結構、なんですよね、あの当時、バネの計算を結構軽い計算ですごい表現ができるっていうのを発見して、それが全体的に応用されて、ツバイの柔らかい感じができてると、当時私は聞いてます。
So from what I recall or what I heard was we had our very, very talented programmers, Suto-san and Nakanishi-san. When they started working on Zwei, they were able to figure out some sort of calculation in terms of how the wings would sort of really give the flow and how realistic that would come out when put on screen. So that would have been perhaps the sort of the magic touch that they gave. And so you see the huge sort of improvements between the original and Zwei.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Could you describe one or maybe a few features that you really wanted to implement into one of the games, but you couldn't due to limitations of the Saturn?
こういうことをしたかったんだけども、やっぱり最終的にすることができなかった気をすることにはゲーム要素ってありますか？ In any one of the three?
Yes.
After all that he said, that they challenged themselves so much.
Okay. How about the first one then?
じゃあ1で。
1で。
1で。
どれもそうなんですけど、ボリュームは結構カットされてます。
So this applies to not just one, but to all of them. Basically, the game volume, we had to cut a lot. So if we had it our way, you would have gotten a lot more of the game.
1とかだと、最後のテートで戦うマップの最後、あれボスいないじゃんって思うと思うんですけど、ボス間に合いませんでした。
So in one, the last map at the map of Tate, you might be like, oh, you're playing it. It's like, wait a minute. Where's the boss? Well, we had to cut the boss.
そのままラスボスにつなげたんで、なんかごまかされてますけど、あそこ本当はずっと一緒にいる母艦がボスになって戦うはずだったんですね。でも作る時間がなかったので、なくなりました。
Yeah, so we simply ran out of time. We sort of convinced, I hope we convinced you that there was or maybe could have been a boss, but then we went to the last boss. But initially there was supposed to be a boss and then into the last boss. So we're sort of not tricking, but we sort of made things up along the way because we ran out of time.
Thank you.
あともう一つあったんですけど、そのメインプログラマーの竹下さんや須藤さんはアーケードの人間だったんです。
So one more thing though, so Suto-san and Takeshita-san, they came from the arcade side.
そう、なのでフレームレートにはこだわりがあって、なんとか60フレームを出したかったっていうのがあります。
Wow. So they were aiming for 60 frames per second.
Wow.
ただ残念ながら面白さを両立させるために最高30なんですけど、彼らがこっそり入れた隠しモードでちょっとだけ60で見れる。隠しチートとかあったりします。
So while they were aiming for 60 frames per second, obviously the fun of the game overall took priority over achieving that frame rate. So eventually it landed around 30. But I guess there's a cheat where you can actually take a glimpse of what it looks like at 60 frames per second. Does everyone know about that? I guess? No? No. 知らないみたいです。
まあ、ウィザードモードとパンドラボックスにちょっとだけ
Oh, and Wizard Box and Pandora Box. Yeah, there's ステージごとあるんですか？
まあそのすごい制限して早く動かすステージが。
Oh, so I guess there's a part of the stage where it's sped up and you could see that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have like 3 minutes.
There's news last year that the first two Panzer Dragoon will be remade. So, do you have any comment on this?
The remake that was announced?
Remake the first two Panzer Dragoon series.
最初のやつがリメイクされるというアナウンスだったんですけど、何かできるんですか？
僕らは今のところ何も言われてないので、制作には関与してないので、いいゲームになるといいなって思ってます。
So we haven't been, I guess, given the word. We're not involved. So all we can wish for is that it turns out, they both turn out well as a project.
Thank you.
Hi, you mentioned Starblade as kind of inspiration for the shooting kind of game that you want to make. When you were making Saga and you know making an RPG, were there any other like RPGs that were kind of big inspiration?
サガではあんまりどうだろう、なんかあったっけ？いや、多分ね、それがあんまないんで、めちゃくちゃ大変だったんだと思うんですよね。
あと後のオープンフィールドを作る人たちに逆にインスピレーションを与えたと思う。話したという。
そんな偉そうなことは言えない。
Sorry, we're laughing, but he's like, that's a good question, but you know, it's probably because I can't name any titles that really influenced or inspired me, and therefore we went into this sort of crazy overachiever concept that we couldn't really pull off because that's what we wanted to do. And then Yoshida-san from the side said, well, it's only because we were able to do what we did. I think we actually inspired people to go out and do this more open field, you know, open map sort of game, like design it that way. And then Futatsugi-san's like, you're acting like a boss right now. You should.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe last question we can take. Yeah.
I just had a simple question that was related to, excuse me, Panzer Dragoon Saga. Was there ever plans to have more than one city? I know development was, rushed, but was there any plans to have more than one city that gets destroyed later?
Yeah. まあ一応町がなくなった後別の町になったりしてますけど、新しい町をもう一個作ろうみたいなのはなかったですね。むしろでもそのゲームの進行に合わせてどんどんいろいろ変わっていくっていうのはやりたかったんですけど、まあそれはちょっとできなかったかなって感じです。
No, actually we didn't. So obviously it was sort of the city was not reborn but rebuilt as a different city. The idea was that city would evolve into a different sort of type of city. We weren't able to get there, but at the same time, we also didn't have any ideas to have a new city either.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're exactly at 3:00. So thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.